My name is Arlette Vargas-Ali, and I am so grateful for your invitation to come and share a little bit about our work. I serve as the Director of Strategic Partnerships in Northern California for International Justice Mission, IJM, which is a global human rights organization that actually relieves the poor from violent oppression in the developing world. And I'm basically here to change the conversation on how we see poverty by looking at everyday violence and ending it. So before I give you a brief background on what we're doing to end everyday violence as a human rights organization, I'd like to talk a little bit about my journey into IJM, because that may give you a brief overview of what compelled me to join the organization. I come from Tijuana, Mexico, and many of you know that's just south of the border, and was privileged enough to be the first one in my family to go on to education and even higher education. So my whole raison d'etre in life was to actually graduate from university and go on to Wall Street so that I could actually use financial services and the capital markets to go and address poverty, the very poverty I saw growing up in my town of Tijuana. And after many years on Wall Street and fast-tracking my way through and looking at ways to provide liquidity into these regions, and also looking at microfinance and all sorts of wonderful economic empowerment tools, I actually met, as a matter of coincidence, an undercover MI5 agent outside of London who was on the anti-human trafficking task force. And she opened my eyes to the fact that if people are enslaved or violently oppressed, they have no hope of actually leveraging all the economic aid that's been sent to them. So it really retweaked my mindset to think about the issue of social justice and relief from violent oppression before all other forms of economic aid could allow someone to come out of poverty. And so I was introduced to IJM, and I felt it was the best-in-class organization that dealt with the problem of violence in a very holistic way. I'll tell you a little bit about our work there, but we're talking about everyday violence here. We're not talking about the violence of war or genocide. We're actually talking about very simple day-to-day things that you see and are in plain sight, but kind of hidden. And this is modern-day slavery, sex trafficking, sexual violence, police abuse of power, property grabbing, and citizenship rights abuse. And all these forms of everyday violence are, in a way, undermining every other form of economic development effort that's taking place. So I'd like to throw out a few facts before I start. According to UN statistics, 4 billion people in this world live outside the rule of law. So in the developing world, there are laws, there's just no law enforcement. Private security ends up being the tool that people that have wealth can actually afford to use to protect themselves from violence. However, the poor have no protector and cannot afford private security. According to stats, the World Bank and the USAID lump sum of aid that goes towards development, only 1% of that or less is actually used to address social justice issues, to protect the poor from violence. So this leaves a huge gap for people in the developing world who cannot afford protection and law enforcement. And I'd like to illustrate a very clear picture of that by introducing you to a lovely girl named Griselda, who had every opportunity to come out of poverty, being from a very poor family in Guatemala City. She had a school down in her neighborhood with teachers and textbooks. But when my IJM colleagues in Guatemala met Griselda, she wasn't going to school. In fact, she was barely leaving her house. And that's because a few days beforehand, while she was walking home with her mother in broad daylight, a car sped up ahead of them, cut them off, and 3 men actually snatched Griselda in plain sight and took her to a place to violate her, brutally raping her at gunpoint. Throughout that time, Griselda had no recourse to law enforcement or justice and was completely broken. So you'll understand that it was not safe for her to even feel like she could go to school, let alone walk out of her house. And sadly, Griselda's not alone. I'll tell you a little bit more about her story later. But for women ages 15 to 44, gender-based violence creates a greater risk of death and physical harm than cancer, motor accidents, malaria, and war combined. And 1 out of 5 women will be either raped or suffer attempted rape in her lifetime. The statistic in Latin America actually almost touches 1 out of every 2, which is terribly sad. And this is according to UN statistics. Another form of everyday violence that plagues the poor that we're trying to desperately address is the issue of modern-day slavery. Presently, according to the Global Slavery Index, we've got 36 million people enslaved today. The profits derived from human trafficking alone exceed $150 billion per year. And that's the 2nd largest growing dark industry after drug trafficking, tied only to weapons dealing. Out of this statistic of 36 million slaves, according to UNICEF, 2 million of these are children who are commercially exploited for sex. And to illustrate a picture of why this is such an issue and why there are laws but there is no law enforcement, I'd like to take you to a place in India where statistics show that if you enslave someone, which is a crime, and half the slaves in the world live in India, you are more likely to be struck by lightning than to be held accountable in the court of law for that crime. There's just no law enforcement. And according to Human Rights Watch, 85% of the police force has not been trained in criminal investigations proceedings. So people act with impunity when they can get away with this economic crime of opportunity. Another form of everyday violence is the issue of forced eviction and property grabbing. When, for example, a widow loses her husband to a sudden death or AIDS, perhaps in the developing world, she is left vulnerable to violently be evicted off her property by either a bully in her community or a stronger neighbor and maybe the husband's family members that want that property. And sadly, she is then unable to fend for her life and the lives of those children she is caring for. So we've seen widows actually witness the death of their children due to lack of nourishment and lack of being able to care for them. The reason why I'm here to change the conversation on poverty and what really IJM is doing to address this issue is really to look at it in a very holistic way. We partner locally with local law enforcement to leverage our undercover investigations to actually go in and do rescue operations with law enforcement. And then we actually go and bring criminals to justice, working alongside the local law enforcement so that the laws are actually enforced and we're able to take cases through a justice system pipeline, working with our legal counsels. Then we actually provide aftercare for the survivors so that they begin to heal from their trauma and allow them to thrive. And after case after case, we're able to pinpoint areas in the broken justice system that need tweaking so that there's a strengthening of the justice system as a whole and it begins to work for those that are poor as well. And we have seen that change is happening. We started in 1997. So almost 20 years ago, we have seen actual progress happen. And we were founded by Gary Hagen, our CEO, who formerly served at the US Justice Department, and then went off to be the director of the UN Rwanda genocide. And what we noticed about Gary is that his concern was addressing the violence against the poor and the people that were under severe duress during the genocide that took place in Rwanda. And he realized that it was that violence that was undermining all other forms of economic aid flowing to Rwanda, because if people had machetes stuck to their heads, they really couldn't think about the next microfinance loan that was going to come to them. Over time, we've grown to 18 offices in the field globally. And our casework has focused around 6 main areas, and I mentioned a few of them earlier today: forced labor slavery, sex trafficking, sexual violence, police abuse of power, property grabbing, and citizenship rights abuse, especially for those people living in hill tribes where they are more vulnerable to being trafficked. I mentioned a little bit about how we are actually a direct service provider to the poor by not just rescuing them, but working alongside local law enforcement to help in the prosecution of the violent oppressors. And we've actually pioneered a very innovative model that allows us to, over time, assess where the areas of the justice system are broken and not really serving the poor judicially. And then we're able to work alongside mentoring locally the police, the prosecutors, the judges, social workers, and magistrates to tweak those areas so that they can begin to work in a self-sustaining way without necessarily needing our help. Our main mission is to really not be needed in those areas so that they do the job themselves in a very self-sustaining way. The reason why we've been very successful, I believe, is that 96% of our staff, we have around 650 staff globally, 96% of us are nationals of the countries in which we serve. So we speak the same language, we look the same as those victims that we serve and the criminals that we're going after and those that work alongside us in the local police force. We're not coming in and imposing some agenda, we're actually working with what they have and bringing out the best of that. And it's working. We have actual measurable results, and our metric of looking at performance has been crucially scrutinized, and we've been able to deliver on what we've set out to do. In 2007, I'll tell you a little bit about our Project Lantern. Funded by a generous grant of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we were able to open our Cebu office in the Philippines. And our aim was to actually empower local law enforcement to take on human trafficking oppressors head on, because they were acting rampantly with impunity. And so we wanted to reduce the number of minors available for commercial sex by 20%, which is a material number, a material reduction. And this was all in the Metro Cebu area. And after 4 years of serving and working alongside, independent studies came out and showed that we didn't reduce it by 20%, we reduced it by 79%. And now what we're seeing in our final phase work in Cebu is that the local police force are actually identifying these crimes themselves and doing the rescue and the prosecution themselves. And people are now saying, well, we can't actually offer minors available for sex because we're going to get prosecuted, and it's no longer a good business to engage in. And that's what we're trying to do. We are trying to show that when the laws are enforced, you establish a deterrent, and the violence stops over time. It's not perfect yet, but we are seeing results, and it's very exciting. In fact, We have rescued, along with our partners, over 23,000 victims of oppression in the developing world since 2006. We have trained over 50,000 police force and judges and social workers in the course of that history as well. And independent studies came out showing last year that our work has helped to protect over 21 million people globally from violent oppression. And that's because we are seeing that our contributions to enhance the local justice systems are becoming so successful that they're actually now working to prevent the crimes before they start, which is really just game-changing statistics. Going back to Griselda's story, our IJM colleagues in Guatemala actually took on her case. They provided aftercare for her and trauma care to begin the healing process of the violent rape she had actually suffered. And then they worked relentlessly to prosecute and jail her 3 assailants, which finally happened 2 years after. They had that kind of political will to keep at it. Griselda has graduated from our aftercare program, and she now plans to enroll in university to get her psychology degree and become a social worker so that she could help other children heal through the pain she suffered herself. So it's very exciting to see that change is happening right in front of our eyes. And many people approach me, and including myself, I thought of, how could I be a change for the better? And I thought of using finance to impact development, and I didn't have the skills of lawyers or social workers or undercover investigators. But you can all do your part right where you are. You can continue the conversation by talking about the issues and bringing them to light, which is the very first step that we need to do. You can connect with us on our website or through social media. You can pick up a copy of our CEO's book, Gary Hagen, The Locust Effect. It really talks about the missing link being violence in the war against ending poverty. And you could also log on to the TED main stage and see his latest TED Talk that just came out, where he was invited to share a little bit about our work. And the other very tangible thing you can do is actually generously and intentionally send money to rescue victims. Every rescue operation costs approximately $5,000. And if you give somewhere around $100,000, you actually fund the cost of 2 national lawyers for an entire year, an undercover surveillance team, and 10 rescue operations with aftercare for approximately 50 survivors. So you get the whole gamut, but everything counts, including using your voice to speak up for those that are silenced by oppression. And the way we ask you to use your voice is actually just by filling out a petition to your representatives in Congress, so that they could vote for the Freedom Commons and create a fund to end slavery. So there's lots of stuff you can do right where you are. You don't have to go out and become a hero or an investigator or anything like that. But I brought a lot of paraphernalia for you to learn a little bit more about the issues themselves, and please feel free to pick up some pamphlets. I brought our year-end review from 2014 with our unaudited financials. The annual report will come out later this year, but we've got the audited 2013 annual report and the 2014 mid-year report as well. We've also got some survivor stories, which I welcome you to take with you. And feel free to pick up a free copy of these end of slavery movies that I showed you a trailer for that talks a little bit more about the issue. Finally, we also have a Justice Review journal that really talks about how we're ruthlessly putting our work into a metric of measuring performance. And we do it in a very in a very simple way, but we need the data to prove that our model works. And what's really interesting is that it's very easy to say, did you rescue a victim? Yes or no. Did you prosecute the assailants? Yes or no. Are they convicted? Are they in jail? And so we're able to actually measure our performance. But what we really end to measure is that there is that severity of the crime and the prevalence of the crime is decreasing as a result of the justice system beginning to work in favor of the people themselves. So not necessarily as a result of our work and doing rescues, but actually as a result of the holistic justice system working. So this is a really unique data-driven journal, which I highly recommend for those in Silicon Valley. And here are the gift envelopes, which you're welcome to pick one up and send back to us if you'd like. And if you have any questions, I would be more than delighted to answer them to the best of my ability. And I really want to just thank you for letting me share the good news of justice for the poor. Thanks very much. Any questions?
Okay, I forgot to explain to you. What I do is I walk the mic around so that the audio can be captured on the video.
Great,
okay?
Great.
And Sandy is going to keep track of who put their hand up. So
Great.
Get her attention, not mine.
Hi. Very good presentation, and very interesting. A lot of things I didn't realize that was happening before. Yeah, one of the things I was wondering is, in 10 years from now, the access to the internet by third world people is going to increase dramatically. Right now there's some 2 billion people of 7 billion connected to the internet, and that's probably going to increase by 3 billion more people over the next 10 years. And I'm thinking that that would put the kind of resources in the hands of third world people, as far as people educating themselves and access to police departments to get training over the internet. And I was wondering if you had sort of a plan for an internet education campaign and aimed at the third world, with the idea that their access is going to increase over time.
Well, actually, that's a very good question. We have looked at the internet in that very positive way, and we have last year received funding from the Google Foundation to scale our work and actually empower others to replicate ourselves, rather than having to do it just on our own as IJM. So already the technology industry is empowering us to use technology and use their funding to scale and provide for a widespread empowerment and capacitation of local law enforcement. To what degree the plan is tweaked, I'm unable to share the exact phasing of that model, but it has happened, and it's become very successful, to the point where it's also proven that we are able to scale and grow our model with the use of technology. And sadly, the use of technology also brings up other things like online child sex exploitation issues and the deep dark web, and we're able to actually join collaboratively with a lot of our tech company supporters here in Silicon Valley to address those issues using technology. So we're really leveraging technology to address and empower, actually. Thank you very much.
Oh, excuse me. Could you give an example of how the process works? For example, if you hear about something that happens in Africa, somebody has to get in there and do research and find the people and get prosecuted. How does all this work, and how long does it take? It seems like it would be a difficult process.
It is indeed. It varies dependent on the type of casework that we focus on. So if it's a crime of forced eviction or property grabbing or child sexual violence against children or human trafficking. It varies, but usually we receive either a missing person report or we actually receive a case stating that someone was forced off their property or someone needs legal assistance. And our lawyers and undercover investigators start collecting data and providing evidence to then local law enforcement to see if we could work collaboratively with them to go and either raid a brothel and provide for a rescue operation and bring those victims into safety, or prosecute through the judicial system a case. So it varies on case by case, but it could take as long as a week to 7 to 10 years, and it really depends on the type of case. For example, unjust incarceration and police brutality issues could take a lot longer just because nobody's really processing legal documentation to even state why a person is unjustly incarcerated, right? So it could vary depending on the crime itself that's committed. Thank you.
Hi. I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago that this movie that won the international Oscar titled Slumdog Millionaire that was actually made in India. And I saw it with a friend at a local theater, and then there is a scene that really makes one cry, which is these poor young boys that are beggars on the streets. The guys that run those boys, they decided to take out the eyes of one of them so he could bring in more money when begging. Well, my friend said, look, it's not only India that does that, other countries do. So I was wondering if they also use girls for being street beggars.
Oh yes, they. You see a lot of victimization, and for women and minor females, they are most vulnerable in the group of not just sexual violence, but forced prostitution and forced slavery in whatever form that is, when they are against their will being forced to do something for someone else's profit. So absolutely. And that's where we relentlessly work to rescue them and provide safety and aftercare, but also provide justice so that the violence stops. Otherwise we have this like vacuum where we take victims out, but then, you know, there's a recycling effect. And we tend to just nip that at the butt so that it ends. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
I was curious, looking at your 2013 financial statements. Thank you. And I see that salaries and benefits went from almost $9 million in 2012 to $22 million in 2013. So I was wondering how that's showing up in effectiveness, different programs, et cetera. And the other thing that kind of puzzled me in your talk, on the website, the two big rescues, there was one for about 500 people and one for about 300 people.
In India.
2012, right. I think. Yeah.
No.
How many of those rescues, say, happened in 13? And when you say rescue, those two were not discovered, initiated by your organization, according to the website. It was somebody called the police or somebody did this. So it sounds like you're really doing support aftercare. But I was just looking, if you did 1,000 rescues in 2013, that would have been over $40,000 per rescue.
Okay, so in 2013, well, I'd like to go to 2014. I just joined in October, but if you, for example, look at the rescue that just took place February 13th, just before Valentine's Day in India, we recently had around 313 people rescued in just one rescue operation. I mean, those things don't happen every day, right? These are people who are stuck in brick mills and rice mills and these places. So they do happen just because of the sheer size of slavery in India themselves. With respect to your question about employee salaries, the issue with that is very simple. We grew exponentially from around 300 to 400 people to 650 now. Our staff grew. We've hired tremendously. We have scaled our work so that as we have been empowering those to replicate our models, we're able to see the sustainability in the long term. We also opened up field offices, and I can't go back to 2013 except for Guatemala, but we've opened up an office in Ghana just last year and an office in the Dominican Republic as well. And in Ghana, we're dealing with child slavery on Lake Volta in the fishing industry, and it's mainly young boys. Whereas in the Dominican Republic, we're actually addressing commercial, sexual commercialization of children for those who are sex tourists that go there for that purpose. So each type of casework requires a different type of expertise for which we hire different number of staff. But we actually, on a per capita basis, comparatively, our costs are way low. And I can't tell you exactly the number of staff that we had in 2013 versus now, but I know that we grew around 200-fold, if I'm not mistaken. And that is why the sheer number of salaries grew, because the number of people grew overall. But the actual salaries themselves, in terms of costs for field, if you look at our charity navigator numbers, the program costs around almost 80%, which is very much the best, one of the best in standard in terms of overall usage of donations into the work on the field. So we keep our general administrative expenses in terms of salary very low. I hope I'm being very clear, but what I can do is just send out an email with the sheer number of staff we had in 2012, in 2013, versus now, which we're at 650 worldwide. You're welcome.
I want to say that this sounds like a great organization, and I thought your presentation was great.
Thank you.
And I want to make a few comments, and I got one question. One about changing the conversation. I think it's important to change it from none to some, at least. And what you said, there were 4 billion people living outside the rule of law, and I think that sounds right to me. I think a big part of the problem is that some national governments are repressive, they're dictatorships, and their main concern, the only kind of laws they want are laws to keep themselves in power. They're not really interested in laws to help the people. I think that's a huge part of the problem. The other thing is, we do have an international criminal court to prosecute people for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide and aggression. But I think there's something missing with this court. We need to expand. We need global courts to deal with these problems. This is a gigantic problem when you have all these people living in poverty and being abused, and the government doing nothing about it. So I think this is really important stuff. I would say it's one of the 3 greatest problems we have on the planet. The other 2 are climate change and the danger of nuclear war.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's very insightful. And actually, the book In the Locust Effect talks about the broken justice systems that were there originally to protect the people in power and never really updated themselves to protect the people they're serving publicly.
Well, I was interested in the figure that you said only 1 in 5 women suffer from rape in the course of their lifetime. I know it's much higher here. Now, do you suppose that's because women are more out and about, or maybe over there they're protected more by their family or don't go out as much? Or what do you suppose? And it might also be in different interpretations of rape.
The actual statistic sheds light on it being either raped or suffering attempted rape. And that's a sad statistic, 1 in 5 globally, but in Latin America it's higher, 1 out of almost every 2. Okay? And the people they're most vulnerable to are people they know. And it's usually either domestic violence or someone trusted in their community, either a soccer coach or a teacher or someone that they feel very embarrassed to bring to light for the crime they've committed. And in other cases, it could be the fathers raping their daughters in places like Latin America or Africa. So it's quite sad, and it's very hidden because it's actually very close to home. Are there any more questions?
I'm going just to compliment the gentleman at the back. He said what I wanted to say. And how much resistance do you find from the governments, particularly most of those places there is a gap between the poor and the rich? And you must have some resistance. And how do you deal with it?
It's a very good question.
And not only this, I want to add something. You know, the animals, when they're hungry, they hunt. And when people get hungry, they hunt too.
Right. So certain governments do just lack the political will to keep fighting this because the sheer size of it is so enormous. And then we also have the issue of police tip-offs that, stifle investigations and rescue operations, but we don't leave. We're relentless. We work and we go and we sit and we sit and we sit until judges listen to us, and we don't go away. And that persistence and that tenacity has accounted for more people just bending their ears and saying, well, I have to listen to them or else they're never going to get out of my office, than trying to shed light on the corruption in the justice system or anything like that. Another thing we have done, for example, we used in Cambodia, in Penang Pang, where there were children ages 4 or 5-year-olds and above that were commercialized for rape. We actually desperately tried with a variety of undercover investigations for years to convince the local police force to actually go and address the issue and come with us on rescue operations, and it just wouldn't happen. Until finally we brought in Dateline, and they made a huge expose working alongside us and filming an undercover rescue, and that just broke loose action. And now you will find, according to independent studies, less than 1% of minors available for commercial sex after that wonderful experience in Cambodia, which truly was transformational. In addition, what we also do is we tend to use the carrot more than the stick. So we actually highlight those politicians and judges and bright lawyers and police officers that do good, so that as they're highlighted as good citizens, people actually engage more and are motivated to act. And once they start seeing results, they believe that it's no longer hopeless, and they actually start working alongside us to do the work that needs to get done, to the point where they can start doing it themselves. So we actually try to pump them up rather than doing a shaming, a naming and shaming. We actually try to empower them to look good and take credit for our work so that they can continue doing it, and one day we can actually phase out.
Do you keep statistics as to the number of individuals you attempt to help and the number of people who are successfully helped?
Yes, we do. In fact, a lot of the statistics are here in our Justice Review, if anyone would like to pick a copy up. Any more questions?
Yeah, just hold on.
Yeah, I came in a little late, so I apologize if you've already answered this, but
That's okay.
all that I've heard was work outside the United States. Do you do any in the United States?
At the moment, we don't. We actually are planning to potentially, and we work collaboratively on some of the legislation on Capitol Hill. But we're really focused on the developing world because people that live under $1.25 a day don't have an access to a 911 phone call. They don't have functioning justice systems. They have nothing. And we go after them relentlessly as if they were our family members because no one will go after them. And here in the United States, while we do suffer from a lot of these issues, there is somewhat of a functioning justice system that we're able to see working, right? Whereas over there, the poverty and impunity is just rampant. So we go to the places really that no one wants to go. Anything else?
Well, I would like to share my experience with my ex-husband. We were sort of invited by one of the American organization to visit the Philippines, particularly Cebu Island, those American organizations had been helping the people living in Cebu Island, but still they wanted us to see from the new point of view. And so my ex-husband and I went to Cebu Island, and then you talked a little bit about the Cebu Island or Philippines, and it sounded like the situation still stayed the same, and that made me a little bit feel disappointed. And I thought of how Japan recovered from the total destruction from the war we started. But anyway, and I feel so much disappointed to hear still in the Philippines, particularly the Cebu Island. Cebu Island is a beautiful island, but anyway. And what have we been doing? That's my question. And what should have been done? Because I know quite a lot of American people who are very sympathetic, who have been very helpful for the people living in poverty in developing countries. And so your talk made me started thinking again about what should we do. Well, that's my
Well, there is much
feeling.
to be done, and actually there is hope because we have reduced the number, or we have collaborated with local law enforcement to reduce the number of minors available for commercial sex by 79% since 2007. So that's huge improvements. And sex trafficking is obviously an industry, and it continues, but we are seeing progress in addressing that, especially for minors, which is huge. Now we're going to pivot into addressing online child sex exploitation as a result. But like you said, what can we do to be part of the change? How can we show up and do something about it? And there's a variety of things you can do. Another thing you can do is actually fill out the sign-up sheet, and I'd be happy to have you receive information on a lot of the rescue operations and any kind of field updates that take place. So you're more than welcome to leave an email address. We can actually send you those details on, and spread the word, create that awareness. It wasn't until someone told me that these issues happened that I changed my career to address them.
In this area, every morning and evening there's traffic jams around the schools because almost all parents drive their children to school and pick them up. So is that justified, as far as you can tell personally?
That's a very good question, and I certainly, as a mother myself, I don't mind carpooling with someone I trust, but I also would prefer to make sure I drop off my child and pick them up on my own without letting them walk. It depends on the age-appropriate nature of that walk, I believe, but there is something to be said about carpooling and public transport that could be leveraged in a way that's sustainable. Anyway, I think that we have time for one more question. Do we? Oh, do we? Okay.
You were working on Wall Street, and partly so that you could understand how to get money. Have you given up on that aspect of it, or is that something that you'll work on more in the future, or do you just feel like money is not the problem and money is not the problem?
Money is not the problem. Of course, we need the money to send rescue, and that's fair, but what you don't want is a big black hole where you just throw money at it and all those things are undermined by the violent predators that take that away from those that really need it. So at this very moment, I am vested in addressing the root of the problem, but there are many organizations that do wonderful jobs that help in the aftermath of those that need to thrive and succeed and stand on their own 2 feet, that are doing wonderful things. But my heart just went to where the root cause of it all was, and that's where I believe I'm meant to use the skills and talents of mobilizing resources towards the place of more need, mainly because there's less than 1% of that in U.S. aid going to address justice for the poor. So I'd like to see that grow before I go into other endeavors using finance.
After people take whatever they want of your literature, we do have a social action table, and you could leave some literature for us?
I'd love to. Thank you so much for that. Any more questions? One more over there.
All right. I have a question. What are your ideas about getting the United States government to do something about this? I mean, I don't hear, in the political discussions, I don't hear Democrats or Republicans talking about this issue or what could be done about it. And there's also a question of maybe other democratic nations, some coalition of nations trying to do something about it. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, we're very much at the forefront of lobbying. In fact, we IJM cannot take credit, even though we were helpful, but we cannot take credit for this recent anti-human trafficking bill that was just passed last week. I don't know if you heard about that, but it just passed last week. So the United States is now putting that on the forefront of the agenda to end slavery in this modern day. We are very much focused on it by petitioning your representatives in Congress on your behalf to actually vote to end modern-day slavery. And we're also petitioning the United Nations to make this one of the new Millennium Development Goals that need to be included, ending violence and ending slavery. So yes, we are definitely pushing domestically for our leadership and government to address the issue, and they are. They provide funding for our work as well, because they know that the people in Guatemala who are vulnerable to exploitation could end up coming here, right? And so we need to look at it in a very holistic way to nip the problem.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I just felt it's just wonderful to hear that there's a group in the world that's got started like yours. And I'm going to contribute to you, and I think that the world really needs this. Now, on a side, I would have liked to have heard more about the crimes that you help with, slavery and other personal justice, but so much of this is focused on sex. You know, the sex trade. It's very popular morally to discuss it, I suppose, for one thing. But I got to thinking about this just now, and you know, there are a lot of men who go over to Indonesia where the young ladies just throw themselves at them. And so trafficking it's not just all about trafficking, and it fills a mutual need because there is a great desire for sex, especially for men who are having a hard time getting her, get older, and want the refreshment of a young lady. And I was wondering, where there is some outlet, or say legal prostitution, especially in countries where there is a lot of this going on, would that aid in the regulation for this, for the crimes that are being done on the minors and the young, do you think? Because otherwise, I mean, to attack sex like it's a moral issue, instead of really something that men who get older and have a lot of money and cannot obtain this, have a great interest in doing a lot for it, and there are poor ladies that are not just minors. And I'm just wondering if you have any evidence that where there is a certain legalized area of this, that this will take the pressure off of exploiting the minors.
Well, we have seen, first of all, there is legislation against what they call the Johns that go abroad, that are American, that go abroad for sex tourism. And when they are caught, they actually are put to jail. And that exists in the United States. And last year, the same bill passed in the United Kingdom, where we were able to put a charity worker, a British charity worker that was raping little boys in Kenya, actually in jail as a result. So it's not just little girls or legalized age prostitution, but it could be of all genders. And so that answers the question of the whole legislation and the males going abroad for the sex tourism and the demand side of the equation, so to speak. And we've seen that as well for those that go abroad in the Dominican Republic for sex tourism. What we try to do is, when we're entering a country that is not necessarily as easy to transform in the justice system, we need to enter in an area where everyone's going to buy into the idea of protecting their children first. So this is where we start, and this is where we show groundbreaking casework and results. And as that happens, and as rescues have taken place, women who are older are stepping up in the brothels and saying, I'm here by force, can I leave too? I mean, you're rescuing these children, but can I leave too? I'm being enslaved. And so that's beginning to happen a lot more, bringing about freedom for those that can actually benefit from that because they're enslaved. Now, those that are of the age of consent, it's harder to make it a legal case against. So when they say, I need help, can you take me too? Then we're able to step in. And as that's growing, we have seen results as well for the overall areas of sex trafficking. But I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about property grabbing and police abuse of power, where people are unjustly incarcerated and can stay in jail for 15 years, 30 years, with no prosecution, no process, no fair case against them to explain the reason why they're being held behind bars, and then their families could be left vulnerable and broken, and all sorts of implications can take place as a result of one innocent person being thrown in jail because the police had to find someone to blame for a crime that wouldn't bribe them, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also have issues of citizens in the tribal hill areas, especially in Thailand, that don't have legal documentation to prove their citizenship, are more vulnerable to be exploited into slavery and trafficking. And so we have provided over 1,000 people, or nearly 1,000 people, with legal documentation to provide them for their legal identity, so to speak. So they could travel, they could get jobs and sustain lives and livelihoods. So there are a lot of other caseworks, but you're more than welcome to learn a little bit more about that in our Justice Review and on our website.
Hi, Arlette. I just had a quick question. Great talk, by the way.
Thank you.
I was wondering about all the food and supplies that charity organizations send around the world to try to fight poverty. And I was wondering if you have any idea of what percentage of those supplies actually get to the people they were intended for. And I assume it also probably varies by country and region. You know, maybe if the supplies go to this area, most of it gets through, and if it goes to this area, most of it doesn't get through. And so I'm wondering what efforts are taken to try to make sure that food and supplies get to the people they're intended for, and is your organization involved in any of those efforts?
If you're talking about in-kind giving, I am so passionately driven to address that, logistically speaking. I don't know what the sheer numbers are that really actually trickle down to the people that need them. But I do know that the numbers are very limited, and it's a very sad case. We are actually a collective group of lawyers, social workers, undercover investigators, and the kind of in-kind gifts we receive are generally like cameras that we can go on investigative work, or legal or technology, legal service hours in kind. So it's a bit different, and it actually flows through directly to the work we need to get done. So sadly, I wish we could use a lot of these other in-kind gifts to provide for aftercare, but what we do is provide it for the rescues themselves.
Okay, so I want to let you know this is the last question, and we're almost ready. In fact, I think we are ready. So we have one last question, so make it quick.
Okay, I just wanted to get back to the idea of seizures. You gave an example of someone whose husband might have died and she'd be left vulnerable. I'm wondering if he's the primary breadwinner, is she just as vulnerable to legal seizure? Or is there some protection for a family in most of the world?
Yes, there is. It's illegal, right? It's an illegal seizure, but... Right, but what we go is we go and try to protect them from a violent forced eviction of someone who's bullying them off their land because they want to be opportunistic about the fact that they have no head of household anymore or protector, and they're left vulnerable. And what we aim to do is ensure that the legal integrity of the documentation states that the widow is actually eligible to maintain that property herself in a very legal way, and a lot of it's just actual documentation. In many countries, it's traditional that the male or head of household has the documentation under his name, but when he dies, usually the next in kin, which is the younger brother or another male figure in his family, wants to take ownership of that property and say they want to take care of his brother's family and so forth, but that doesn't happen. They're generally run off their properties and left vulnerable. So what we do is we protect that. It's illegal, but because there's no law enforcement and the poor cannot afford protection, they can't even dream of having an educated lawyer go and fight their case for them. And that's where we step in.
Okay, so let's give a hand to our speaker. That's the last question.